surely they got some condoms out at one point, but it was early. I think it was like year 7, year 8. And briefly, and we were more interested in the female science teacher than we were with what she was teaching, or woman. Beyond that, yeah, it was just porn all the way, and maybe some, sort of locker room talk about this and that, but from a real sense of status.
You're listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. I'm your host, Mike Campbell, and the aim of this podcast is pretty simple: to support you in building rock-solid foundations, legendary integrity, and kick-ass relationships with plenty of stories, a load of lessons, and a solid dose of some loving straight talk. So let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Legends podcast. I am your host, Mike Campbell, and today I'm bringing you a guest, Mr. Alex White. Alex is a friend of mine. He, in the past, has worked, more specifically with men in around the world of sex and sexuality. We used to be part of a little mastermind together, which was a wonderful place, both for my growth as a person, as a man, as a business owner, but also to be in a container with Alex and a couple of other gentlemen. That's where I got to know Alex. And it's what brought me to really wanting to bring him on the show today. What he does these days is a little bit different in part to the side of sex and sexuality and what we're going to talk about on this podcast, which is like the sex education that you actually missed out on. But as you'll probably find when you get into the conversation here, it's all pretty damn related. Let's do this. I'll give you Alex's bio as provided by him, and then we'll explore from there briefly. Alex, nature-based guide and retreat manager. First person from Alex. I am driven to create spaces of love of nature, each other, and one's self. My life is directed towards being a nature guide, super dad, and creative adventurer. A former digital strategist and art teacher, I hold a variety of skills that combine to offer uniquely intimate experiences. With training in movement, meditation, massage, and coaching, I enjoy one-to-one and group facilitation focused on somatic awareness and play. My being and the land I care for is cultivated to guide people towards deeper relationships with their own body and its natural state of expansion and creative expression. All with the support of and connection to our natural world. And so what you're going to explore in this conversation is, first of all, we talk about the work that he's doing on his property with retreats, but more so in nature. And so if you're one of those people like, I love nature, oh, sweet, you'll dig on this. But if you're a guy who's like, I live in the city, I didn't give a shit about nature, well, cool. And I invite you to listen to the start of this conversation where we start to explore, okay, so why nature? What is it in it for us? And does it need to be, going bush for a month, a week, or can it be actually visiting, the local park, let's say? There's some really beautiful nuggets and really practical pieces that Alex brings in this piece on nature. And then, of course, where does that take us to? Well, it's relationship to self, relationship to nature, Mother Nature. There's so much parallel and correlation to where we go in this conversation, talking about sex. One of those things that carries so much weight, shame, a whole bunch of our shit as men. And what we start to see is like, man, the stories that we have around sex and sexuality come from many places, environment, growing up, etc., and also often in school where we were, quote, educated on sex or not. Either way, we got some education. If it was absent, there's still an education there. And so what we explore here is a few of the pieces on what perhaps might be a more effective sex education for boys, for young men, and for you and me, everyone listening right now. Some beautiful wisdom and practical stuff that Alex brings us in here. I trust that you get something from this. As always, if you like this, make sure you share this with another man in your life. Pass it on. And if you like this podcast, let me know. Send me a message. Please rate, subscribe, leave a review, especially on Apple, because it makes it so much easier and more powerful for this podcast to get in front of more men. Thank you for listening. As always, I appreciate you. And now into the show. Alex, welcome to the Everyday Legends podcast.
Thank you very much. It's great to have a chat.
Great to have you here, mate. It's been a while for us personally. So yeah, cool to catch up and really keen to dive into some of the stuff that, we've talked about a little bit off air, but I'm sure we'll venture into. So this is podcast. So let's go where we want to first go, which is like, we have this guest. And I know a bit about you, but perhaps my audience don't. So I want to do an intro, but where I want to throw that to you is a question that, of course, you can take anywhere you like. And that is this: who the hell is Alex White?
Well, it's always a good question. Definitely asking myself that a lot. More so even lately. I mean, a very quick cliff note is I'm 43. I've got a 7-year-old daughter. I just came out of divorce about 2 years ago, maybe separated 2 years ago, divorced a year ago. And so lately, a bit of a free agent, which feels good. Certainly traversed the divorce journey fairly well. And so these days, although I used to spend a lot of time doing workshops and facilitating and lots around sexuality and intimacy and polarity, I actually threw myself into running a retreat center. So I've gone all nature-based, which has been both a personal need and journey, and also a way that I can serve a whole bunch of people by just getting us into nature. And so, spent a lot of the last 2 years in the bush and on my property down the coast, and just really doing the fundamentals, keeping my kid happy, keeping me sane, and working on the land a lot.
Thank you for that. Was there something that kind of just happened? Was there a historical connection to nature, which is a ridiculous question in part, but in terms of your life, was it something that was quite present? Was it something that just kind of called for you? Was it something that, happened as a result of the divorce? What took you to this place?
I mean, all of the above. I think it was, given we're going to talk about sexuality today, I think I was already sort of exiting that field as a personal inquiry and as a facilitator. It's a field that's fraught with a lot of issues that we might get into. But also just in general, my body was like, right, what's really important to me? And getting out and understanding nature, having conversations directly with nature, with myself, has been something that's always been there. The place I have down the coast is very similar to where I was born. I was born in Mornington Peninsula at the Bush Hospital, surrounded by tea tree and sand. And that's exactly where I've ended up. I just feel very much at home there. I'm a fairly homely person. And then the rest was just circumstances. Like, I wanted to buy the property off my ex as part of the division there. So that all worked quite well. I love it there. Phoenix loves it there. I love bringing up a kid on that land. And just general flow. And luckily that has led to some business endeavors down there running this retreat center, and also just a lot of personal benefit doing all the things.
All the things. Well, so one I hear in there is, being of service to others, because it's a retreat space, so people can come and experience that, both being in nature and then potentially what that specific experience might involve. And then for you being in nature, so this could sound like an obvious one, but I think in a big chunk of the world we live in right now, it's kind of not a lot of the time. What do we get from being in nature? Like 101.
Look, I tend to
we live in cities, we live in all the tiny apartment buildings sometimes, obviously different people, different places. But for you now, one, knowing it, then being immersed in it, inviting people into the space. How would you explore that?
Look, it's a difficult question, feeling empathy for people who don't necessarily have that opportunity, because I say difficult because I think what you get out of it can only be felt over a very long period of time. I've been listening to a lot of Martin Shaw lately. He spent 4 years in the bush in a tent writing poetry, basically. He's an amazing storyteller. And I think it's literally being in the forest, in inverted commas, teaches you a lot. And it's, I've been listening to some Josh Schry today as well with the Emerald podcast. He talks about going back to the forest as this sort of innate human need, and that the forest is not necessarily all beautiful and twinkly fairies. There's a lot of benevolent and sort of murky aspects there as well to really get into, getting used to being in the dark, listening, a lot of birds. So I think on a practical note, for the people who could only maybe spend, a weekend or a week camping, it is attuning your body away from the concrete and the cubes to things like wind, birds, sun. What time is it without looking at my watch? What direction am I facing? Orientating yourself back to earth. And then, you know, not to bring it back to sexuality, but then somehow things can feel very beautiful, very eros. There's a lot of eros out in nature.
What do you mean by that?
I think if you spend it long enough out there, your body becomes more alive, and generally, very naturally, when we feel alive, we feel erotic, we feel pleasurable, we feel like we want to create stuff, whether that's with your hands and making stuff, whether that's making love to a partner, whether that's just feeling very pleasant. I think they're all, really simple, natural, and sometimes for some people harder to experience because they have to relax and rest and do all the things to take off all the layers that the city has put on.
Yeah, and one of the things that I can feel come up and also witness, you know, a lot in the guys that I'll work with is to that point there, right? Like there can be that might not be a simple process. You know, there might be a lot of blocks, a lot of shit in the way, but you know, I've got to be doing something, I've got to be productive. And really what that is inviting you to do is to be with nature. You know, and for guys, we're often so, you know, very narrow focused, a task, a do, achieve, a result, doing. My worth, my value as a man is connected to how much I can do and how much I can achieve and how much I can accomplish. And productivity, I've got to be productive. And even the struggle is to sit down and relax at all, let alone like actually let go and fully be immersed, to listen. And I think, you know, to listen to the birds, etc., but specifically like actually to just listen for a moment. Like what is coming up in you? What is your body saying to you? You know, you've referenced that a few times, right? Like paying attention to the body already. That can be a mighty challenge. There can be a lot of resistance that comes in there, and just letting go and being. And the creativity piece I love, because I think what I experience personally and also witness in a lot of guys is it might not be, you know, we often have this idea of what creativity is. It's music, it's painting, it's fucking lots of things, right? And something that you want to go and do and build. That could be anything, you know, from literally something with your hands to a business, something in your business. But often we need to stop and listen so we can get that voice, you know, of creativity, of aliveness, which I love. So then, okay, we've got guys who are like, yeah, I mean, I get that. It's hard to see the real point in it, or it's hard to justify actually allowing myself to relax and spend some time, you know, be it in nature or not. So if I were to go, all right, then, fuck it, I'll give it a crack. Without the deep end, what could that look like as a simple kind of first step?
Yeah, I definitely hear that, because it has to have some benefit. And I also hear the doing.
Well, often we're searching for that immediate benefit right now.
Yeah.
And I understand the process, it's patience and so on, but sometimes we need that first thing in order to allow us to, you know, let go for the next thing, right?
Yeah, and there's really two paths there, because you do have to, for all of us, including myself, have to drop the doing, especially when I'm on my own property. I've got a list in my mind.
Of course.
Can make that, and
a list that never ends, right?
It never ends. I have to take myself off my property in order to actually really drop all of that. So that is definitely one aspect, is to drop the doing, because it's a permanent thing there, and we want to fix stuff and make stuff and create, which is great.
Which is also not to diminish the importance of those things, but time and a place, right?
If you're doing it 99% of the time, though, it gets a bit much. So anyway, I think, well, one, just to talk on a particular benefit that comes up for me, is that when I do spend any immersive time in nature, sure, there's the lovely experiences that happen at the time, but definitely for the next week, if not two, if not three, time slows down. And sure, it's like, oh, well, great, time slows down, but you get to do more in that time when you're not rushing and distracted so often. an hour you can do so much with, rather than maybe being distracted for half of that. You're actually deeply involved in time, and it starts to stretch. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits of going into nature and regulating your nervous system, slowing down, is that potentially when you bring that back even into a workplace, you're actually getting more done with the time you have, because you've noticed that time is kind of just a concept and one can get a lot more done.
Yeah, but there's that clarity that you're talking about, right? That can come with shutting down all the other noise. Simplifies.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other benefit is clearing out. And I think, it's difficult. There's two paths definitely with working with nature. There's sort of this very intense, short, somewhat tribal way to go about it. Maybe like 4 days in the bush, you in a sleeping bag, no food. Let's just really see who's who.
Yeah.
And it's intense and it works. It's tried and true for thousands and thousands of years. And then there's the weekly, monthly, years in the trees that I've luckily got to experience lately. And I think both are good. And if you can't have the long-term one, then you might as well dig in and go for a more immersive experience. It's interesting I mentioned dig in, because I think that is one of the fastest ways. And here's a really practical, quick thing, is just to clear some earth, maybe take off some top layers of the grass, and just lie the fuck down in the ground and rest. It feels amazing to just be on the earth. It's getting away from all the esoteric, you got to feel more grounded and centered and all this sort of stuff. It's like, well, yeah, you can do that by laying on the ground for as long as you possibly got, and just
grounded your body on the ground.
Yeah. I think it's a very underrated activity.
I love it. Do you think then, for those who don't necessarily have that availability, challenging responsibilities in terms of time, distance away, but like most cities have parks and so on, is this the kind of thing that we can bring in as a bit of a practice if one is perhaps brave enough to go, you know what, if I can lie down in that spot over there?
Exactly.
Or not just the lying down, but certainly using that space.
Yeah, I mean, we all have nature is going to always be here, and it's going to take over when we're long gone. So I think if you can find a park, a beach, whatever supports you, this idea of land actually holding us is a very practical thought. You can make yourself a nice, comfy spot on the beach pretty easily. Sure, you might be surrounded by some other people, which could be distracting, but there are ways. Take a blindfold, take some earplugs. Do some sensory deprivation on yourself, just to feel what your body feels like when it's on the ground. And in a park, just forget your picnic rug, go along and see what it feels like to lay on the grass. You might get a couple of insects on you and whatever else, but that's being human. I think it is something that everyone can access, and 1 minute is infinitely more than zero. And if you can do that during your lunch breaks, then go for it.
Yeah, I love that. And there's a term that you use in there, which I think is really worth exploring. Potentially now, but for us as individuals, and this was, as you said, like, feel your nervous system kind of slow and calm. Right. And it seems to me it's often one of those things that maybe we have no awareness of. We don't really learn so much, about what's your nervous system doing unless you go and learn those things. But it can be one of those things that is like just fucking going crazy, and we feel busy and, we live busy lives, and hey, it's the easiest thing in the world to be busy. But also what's often going on, like physiologically, is your nervous system is just going fucking crazy, but it feels normal. And so we don't realize that's the case until we slow it, until something invites us to clear, to empty, to slow, to ground. And then we have that point of relativity, right? Is that something that you see when people come to the space?
And I also have empathy for that. That can be scary as fuck.
Yeah.
To actually,
there can be a sense of control there, right?
Yeah. And although, we may not feel what's going on there, I think we have an intuition that there is a lot going on under the surface, and that can feel like, I don't really want to slow down. I don't want to feel that much, because I might realize that I'm running at 1,000 RPM and that can feel very overwhelming. I definitely have had that feeling,
Of course.
in the past.
Yeah, because there's that intuition, there's that knowing, and often the complicitness and the complicity and keeping that at bay. Because if I start, what comes into that space, that can be terrifying, right?
Exactly.
Well, the idea of it can be terrifying.
The idea of it can be, and also you don't know what you'll find. You don't know what you will feel when you start feeling. I think all this sort of sensitization and intimacy work should come with a massive caution sign. It's like caution ahead, feelings ahead. You don't know. But I also feel like it's interesting. I think you nearly had that the better the devil you know.
Yes, right.
Conversation quite recently, and I thought, yeah, it's exactly that. It's like we don't know what we're going to feel, but if we get in there, then we can start exploring things like better intuition, better decision making, better choices, and just feeling ourselves, people around us, which can have a lot of benefit in all sorts of realms, especially relating.
Yeah, I think the simplest thing really is that it there's so much, but it can provide clarity. You know, when we can have a clearer mind, when we can understand ourselves better, we can make simpler decisions, more directed, value-based decisions. Things can become easier. And I can still be productive until all those points, right? But I can actually, apply myself with a little bit more alignment at the very least, and things have a bit more ease.
More ease. And I think your clarity term is a good one, and it doesn't necessarily have to take that long. I think it does require some elemental connection, whether it's staring at a fire, whether that be, a log fire at a pub or out in the bush, whatever. But yeah, staring at a fire works really well. Feeling your body on the ground with as much skin as possible on the ground. All these things can invite you to some very clear thoughts. Sometimes they're just like, oh yeah, like that's been sitting there the whole time and I need to go in this direction now. Can happen very quickly, especially once it becomes the practice.
Yeah, I was going to say once the practice, right? Like I'm currently in the midst of a practice of spending 40 minutes a day. I'm 40 at the start of this year. I turned 40, and it was a busy day. All things were happening, and it was like towards the end of the day, my dad was in town, and finally I got a moment to sit. And I was like, I need to go sit, just fucking have a moment. And I sat down, and a very quick thought came, surprisingly, was I'm not doing this enough. Sitting, being, contemplating. And so then very quickly was like, okay, well, let's do more of it. And, there's a big part of my brain that is logical. So this very simple step was like, well, you're 40 minutes a day while you're 40. So I'm in the midst of that practice of 40 minutes a day. And then sometimes it's not 40 in one block, but it's moments. And there's big questions that I'm contemplating that have come into that space. And I have my phone there just to write a quick note down, because I know that I'll forget things, to support that, but not to spend the time in my phone. But often I'll even get into the, that's a big question that I was going to contemplate, and there can be some resistance there. And then I sit down, and in an instant, often some little piece, unrelated, but it could be like, holy shit, that is a great idea. Or, like, how have I not thought about it? Well, because I haven't sat and cleared some space. And so for me, my experience, is the more and more I'm relearning that lesson almost daily. It's like how simple it can be, certainly with consistency and practice. Two, not necessarily clear the mind, because I think that's often this thing that we get this idea there's going to be no thoughts there, but simply quieten a lot of the noise, and therefore allow other things that are there to pop up and get a little bit more time in the sun.
Yeah, definitely to pop up. And also you mentioned listening, and it really is. It's sort of listening to something bigger than yourself, whether you're into that at a spiritual level or just a practical level. Listening to the fractals of noise around you is going to do things to your brain and allow those ideas to drop in that were already there. I think listening in general is a skill that we all, myself included, could get a lot more skillful at, and it takes time.
Yeah, and there's a lot of depth to that too, right? But I love this one line, and I always forget who I can't attribute the quote to, though. I'll do my best to find it and put it in the show notes. We have 2 ears and one mouth, right? And perhaps we could use them in that proportion. Okay, so we've spoken, some man, I love exploring that, and one of the things I think is it's certainly clear there's so much scope here, right? And let's be clear, this isn't saying getting back in touch with nature means, leave your job, buy a farm and disappear and become a hermit fuck, maybe it could for you, but
And go
a
for it.
simple invitation to, am I being with nature? And I think one of the things, like I'll explore this in my program with my guys, at some point we'll explore the idea of nourishment. It's one of those things that we often just locate to food. And it is, or it can be, it can also not be. But nourishment is many things, and there are other elements, but a couple of ones that I'll always come back to are sunlight and nature. They're so nourishing. Human connection, play, music, these things, but nature and sunlight are so human. And so there is a simple invitation there to be experiencing those at the very least, right?
Yeah, definitely. And the whole eating thing, and not eating while you're doing that saves a whole bunch of time. I did a vision quest about 4 weeks ago, and I was just gobsmacked because we don't eat for like 60 hours. Right. I was like, Jesus, I spend a lot of time making food or thinking about food or doing all this stuff. And I'm like, wow, so much time. I mean, obviously you can't fast all the time, but I was like, yeah. And it was literally that sunlight and nature and nothing else provided a great deal of clarity.
Can you talk us through this vision quest? Maybe not the depth, but certainly give us an idea of what this might involve.
It's popped up a couple of times while you were talking, because I think your practice of taking 40 minutes out a day, these vision questers, one of their most simple but also highest held practice is a sit spot, and it's literally sitting in nature though for a period of time a day, and a consistent regular spot. I think somewhere where you can go, feel comfortable, safe, listen, and also start to notice the shifts over a longer period of time. Seasons, birds, whatever it might be, yourself.
And an anchoring to one spot as well, right?
Yeah, because then you're not distracted by all the other things. You're like, who am I today?
Yeah.
I used to do it at festivals, once a year. It was like, oh, okay, who am I at Rainbow Serpent this year? But this is more like a daily version of sit spots. So anyway, I just thought I'd mention that as a practice of theirs. But vision questing, it's a whole thing. We could spend a lot of time on it. It's a process held by a lot of tribal native cultures. The one I was taken into was held by facilitators who had done all their work mainly with some of the tribes in what is now America. And again, two sort of paths, like some very intense, 3 days naked, a blanket, no food, no water. That's one end of the spectrum. And the other, this is held by Claire Dunn as part of Nature's Apprentice, was a bit more supportive in terms of, it's like this was a 2.5 day, 60-hour fast, and very self-led. See what comes up for you in terms of self-led ceremony, and design your own experience. Sure, right. Stay within a space.
Yep.
Keep yourself safe. But yeah, sleeping bag, blanket, enough water for those days, and kind of just see what comes up with maybe one tool, a particular movement or dance, if you need to shift things, or maybe you're just bored out of your brain and you want some things to come up. Yeah, there was a particular movement that one would do to sort of bring these things up. But yeah, it's super simple. I think it's definitely something that needs to be guided. First experience at least. But yeah, if anyone listening could find time, it could be 6 hours, 12, 24, to go and just sit. And I remember my first experience with this that I did do myself. I just got really bored. But it was great to recognize that it was like, oh, okay, what now? Like, what comes up? I think I ended up making I just had to make something. I made some clapsticks. I happened to have an axe with me. But that was fine. Like, that was part of the ritual of being there, and then being quite important in my life, actually. So yeah, vision questing. It's a way. It's a way.
And
who don't want to sit on a stool in a white room type of meditation style. That suits some people, but for me, sunshine and wind.
Yeah, and nature and being. I think this is again back to that theme. And one of the things that I think can be such an important differentiation to make is this difference between being by ourselves and being with ourselves. You can spend a lot of time by yourself, but where are you? Busy, distracted, numbing, whatever it is. And there is an invitation there to spend some time with yourself. And I love that invitation to actually being bored. This is a challenge I set some guys that, that work with me, because it can bring up so much, and you can look at that and go, why? Well, because let's look at what's there. It could be some really important shit that you haven't explored. It could be uncomfortable. It could be clarity. It could be ideas. It could be anything. But if you want to know yourself better, you've got to be with yourself at a very basic level, right? And yeah, it might not be fasting for 60 hours, but at least a practice to that kind of longer, consistent piece that you spoke to before as well, right?
Yeah, look, I apart from that as an extreme example, you're absolutely right. It's about forming a thread that is daily, or at least near daily. One of my teachers, Steve James, refers to it. Yeah, it's just a golden thread of practice that you can, then your body can refer to that. Oh, where am I at today? Like, I am in a different place, or I am developing slowly and incrementally, making changes over time. It can only be done with daily practice.
Yeah, and also let's extrapolate that out to basically everything. I know that's a very broad brushstroke, but consistency is, I think, one of the simplest things when it comes to most, endeavors, changes that we are hoping to make. It's very easy to try and climb the mountain in one go, but that consistency is reassuring to the nervous system as well. I think, as you see it, it's something you can come back to. Yeah, I love that. Okay, so now I want to tangent, because we've referenced it a couple of times, and I'm sure we'll be able to relate it back.
Easy.
But you've spoken also about relating, and look, what's one of the things that establishing and grounding that relationship to self, what does that allow? Is greater connection with others, right? And look, as humans, nourishment, nature, sunshine, food, humans, we are social creatures. Enter a lot of the shit that comes into being social and relating with other humans. A lot of the ideas and messages and shit that we pick up along the way. We have spoken about a lot of this kind of stuff that falls into that umbrella on this podcast, and and a lot of my stuff in the past. But one of the things that I think is very central and essential to that is sex and sexuality. I mean, look, shit, we wouldn't be here without it. Right. And so I know you said, look, you spend a lot of time in that space, and it's something you've moved away from a little bit, but man, I know that you have a lot of experience and wisdom in there. So what I'd love to explore is sex tends to hold a lot of power for men, and that is also broad in and of itself. But it can be something that we're desperately seeking, that we're terrified of, that we have a lot of shame around, that we place a lot of our identity onto. So where I kind of want to start with that is, what have you seen when it comes to how the story and therefore kind of idea around sex starts and forms for us?
Yeah, thank you. It's I mean, look, obviously it's an amazingly large topic, because, as you say, we can
nail it in 5 minutes. Go.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's part of the human experience, and therefore underlies our being. We are here because of sex, and that can be seen as very positive, as in sex is, especially for those that have been privileged enough to have kids or have chosen to do that. I regard kids as the greatest sex magic ever. It's two people came together and they made a whole nother human. It's incredible.
Yeah, my daughter's not quite 2, so my guess is this might not ever end. But there is reasonably frequent times where I'll look at her and I'll be like, "We fucking made her!" Like, isn't that the weirdest thing?
Yeah, and it happened through two humans coming together. That being said, sexuality in its general is certainly not about just reproduction. However, the energy behind two people coming together comes from that. We can't escape our evolution of bringing two people together to make another creature. So yeah, where do we start on this? I think, given that we've just talked about nature and also spending time by yourself, I think the paradox or the parallel from that is that, unfortunately, as young boys and men, we saw sex as the absolute opposite. I've got to go and get a girlfriend, and I've got to have the sex, and I've got to not be a virgin. And that has everything to do with someone else out there in the world. And I think that initial imprint of sex is something I get, sex is something that has to involve someone else or something else outside of me, is the sort of start of the conveyor belt, possibly in the wrong direction, or at least an unhealthy direction, if that's the only thing we all look for. And I'm not standing here as some guy who's overcome that necessarily, or telling you how it is, but I wish I hadn't had that frame placed on me early. And I say placed on me because I happened to pick up some porn on the way home in grade 5, I think. And that was a massive juncture in my life, because it instantly was out here, very visual, very external, and I've got to go and get it.
Yeah. And do you think that one of the other things that perhaps extends from that externalization is, like, in part, it's not, it's for me, but it's also not, because I learned that, you know, part of my identity and my status, and therefore, you know, the respect and kudos that I get from my peers and those around me, that it's reliant on that. I get the thing, and then I get this new badge and this new progression in life, kind of thing as well.
Yeah, there's the status aspect, there's the performance aspect of it. And I think, you know, we'll jump off the nature train now, but it has so many parallels in terms of, can you spend time with yourself in nature for your own benefit? And so in the sexual realm, can you spend time with yourself, perhaps exploring pleasure or whatever it might be, for your own nutrition, for your own nourishment, for your own exploration? And I would love, and definitely, you know, when my daughter is old enough, I want to give her that frame. You know, sexuality and pleasure is for you to explore, potentially, and I hope really, by yourself first. When you understand your own body really well, then you can go and play with those aspects with someone else, rather than entering the massively confused and just, you know, groping around in the dark that many of us perhaps experienced.
Yeah, with so much on it a lot of the time to that performance piece, right? You know, that's become such a big thing in my own experience, but what I've, you know, seen it amongst men that I've worked with and spoken to, my friends, and, you know, going through those teenage years and early 20s, was, you know, the performance of was almost part of, you know, attachment to identity and how much of a man I am, you know, and these kind of things as well, right? And also, you know, what I'm hearing in that is, like, first of all, the exploration with self. One, let's flag something around, you know, like moralization around masturbation and stuff. But when I get to know myself and you know, what I like and what I want in my own body, it may change this result, which perhaps many of us have had, which is, you know, it's either it's all take or it's all give. You know, there's no connection to self, right? You need to give me the pleasure, or my performance I need to give to you, and there's a complete kind of loss or abandonment of self in that as well. Maybe it becomes this transactional thing.
It can become transactional, and then even when you get the thing that you thought you wanted, it doesn't hit the mark, because you haven't communicated to yourself first, or to your partner, what you actually want to explore. It's just this sort of freight train of old patterns going, I think this is what I want, and I'm going to go and get it. And then it's just a bit of a disappointing hot mess. It can be.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, we can speak in broad terms, right? Because, you know, in my experience, for a lot of us guys, it simply comes down to this one idea of, like, I just need an orgasm. It's that physical release. That's what sex is.
Yeah.
So when that becomes one of the predominant beliefs that we take on board, what does that lead to, and what do we miss out on?
Yeah, I think we miss out on just so much. And it really, none of this hit me until reasonably recently in my life, over the last 4 or 5 years. I think the main thing is that we miss out on our self-expression, our creativity, our finding out who we are. And when you find out who you are in the sexual realm, what you like, what you want, what your character does, and then perhaps start to be in a more commanding position of that. It's like, oh, okay, I'm starting to understand who I am in this sexual realm, and I can take it somewhere. I can explore and play and be creative, rather than be controlled by it. To be very goal based, just going for the one, getting the sex, and then two, getting the orgasm.
Yeah.
For me, maybe for my partner, or maybe only for my partner. For some men.
Or really passive type of like aiming for without clear communication and so on, right?
Yeah, that my intention is not congruent. That's a whole conversation that we probably should have, actually. But anyway, to your point, what are we missing out on? I think we're missing out on actually expressing ourselves during sex. It's all very well to express ourselves out there in the world, in the boardroom, what we do for work and who we are with our friends and all that sort of stuff. But I think once you actually take some command of who you are during sex, and then to explore that, maybe some things need to be changed, be transformed, to come out the other side as one of your creative expressions, a very powerful one. I believe that's what we're missing most, apart from all the health benefits and exploring what an orgasm can feel like, or what orgasmic states in general can do for the body. I think that.
And I think, like if we pull back, you said to self-expression in different areas, often what we might see in nature, wherever, whatever the practice, when we start to explore, like, who are you, right? Because I think that's such a fucking important question to explore, and a lot of us don't know. And we start to see, holy shit, I'm a collection of ideas and stories and belief systems and shit that's been passed on to me. And, experiences that I've been through, and like, there's a bit of work to kind of chip away and let go of some of those things. We just transplant that into the bedroom. Like, how do I show up here in the bedroom or whatever sexually? It's just even that is a term, right, that is immediately associated to sex in the bedroom. Clearly it's still in my own being. I'm performing. I'm showing up here as a set of ideas about what sex is, what it needs to be. Maybe that's based on a religious upbringing that I had. Maybe it's an immense influence from porn, and so it's not me. It can't be you by default if you are just performing what you have seen and learned, right? And so by default, we're at least stunting our experience of what could be, right? It's almost robotic in a sense.
I think it's a great term, stunting our experience. It's quite possible that people out there may be experiencing 10%, maybe even 5%, 1% of what's possible in that realm. And then unfortunately, for whatever reason, the sexual realm is somewhere that people don't feel that they have permission to explore that. They may be creative in their own right, or doing great at business or work and making things happen in the world. But I think when you can start to, I think it's really stepping out of the go of sex, just the patterns just unfolding
just
and
get the result, right? Just get that result.
Yeah, if you can catch yourself in that and actually start transforming, it's the same with meditation. If you can catch your thoughts and start guiding them in a certain direction, you're starting to command yourself a little bit. I could even say it's the same with dreaming. People have lots of dreams. At times you can catch a dream and actually start to guide that somewhere. That's a skill. It's the same in sex. If you can just get out of and I was in this pattern for decades and decades, just the goal-based in it, not really thinking, until afterwards, like, I could have gone a little better, or probably could have explored that for a bit longer, or do I really feel like I got what I wanted out of that particular session? And probably not for me in my previous relationship, not communicating that at all before or after.
Yeah, and I suppose by default, probably anything in life, if we're only getting 1, 5, 10% of what potentially is available, then often what we've learned in the general realm of instant gratification, but because that greater percentage, let's say, generally takes a longer time, right? Delayed gratification, perhaps. We just go for more of the short hits. And that, for a lot of men, myself included, in vast past experiences, certainly as a young man, because it was the only way, connected to all that kudos and all the things, right? The notches on the bed, all that shit, was more of that. And what we start to learn, certainly I had that realization, was like, well, that isn't cutting it. And if nothing else, I'm starting to realize there's more that sex can provide for me. One, it's this intimate emotional connection that can come about with another individual, be it at a long-term level or even, you know, a one-off experience. I think that's always one of the things that becomes very clear for me. Like, what is it about? On some level, it is this, you know, intimate experience between people.
Absolutely. And that trap is really hard to get out of, because obviously we're chemically addicted because we've been, you know, masturbating or having sex in a particular way for so long. It's like, right, I feel good, I'm doing this particular action and it has some result that my brain and my body kind of likes. And I've done that 1,000 times, 10,000 times. I'm going to keep doing that. But you become a bit of a rat in a maze, really. It's sort of like, press the button, get the dopamine hit, press the button, get the dopamine hit.
Press the mouse click, press the phone screen.
Yeah. Oh, yes, exactly. And so I think just a moment of empathy there for people who are in that cycle of being chemically addicted to a particular action. And that is hard to break. Definitely took, well, for me personally, it took 10 days of Vipassana to really crack that on the head and I didn't expect it to at all.
Right.
About 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Just got slapped over the back of the head on day 7 with, hello, this is not going to happen anymore. This was mainly around objectification of women, actually, and porn and a few things. So yeah, it's a hard thing to shift because, as you started the whole thing with, it has a lot of weight, a lot of power, and a lot of chemical influence.
Okay, so there's a couple of thank you, and so I want to explore that. One of the things, maybe we'll come back to it. You know, just this is potentially from my own mental processing. You know, we don't allow ourselves to explore who we are. So I'm really keen to explore, like, why the fuck is that? But this thing that I think could be such a fucking powerful piece for young men and men when it comes to, you know, let's say more wholesome, maybe not wholesome, more well-rounded sexual education, is this piece around objectification of women and others, because of course there's a lot of scope there, right? So yeah, can you take us into this, maybe from your own experience? But yeah, speaking to, like, okay, I use the term there, sex ed.
Yep.
I mean, that's almost laughable, isn't it?
It is, and unfortunately it still is, unless you happen to go to a gem of a school. I think we're talking in broad brushstrokes. Yours and mine, and younger men's education is porn. You know, we didn't at school. I cannot even remember. I went to a boys' school for high school, at least. Surely they got some condoms out at one point, but it was early. I think it was like year 7, year 8. Right. And briefly, and we were more interested in the female science teacher than we were with what she was teaching. Poor woman. And beyond that, yeah, it was just porn all the way, and maybe some you know, sort of locker room talk about this and that, but from a real sense of status, and either status in like the good, the what is it, the celebratory stories, the winning stories, or deep shame on, did you hear what this guy did? I've got this story in my mind of a poor guy. Is like, did you hear what, I try not to use his real name. Did you hear what Simon did with X yesterday? And it stuck with him, like nicknames and all the rest of it. Right, so I think, there's obviously 2 ways to go on that, but bring me back to where we're going there.
Well, so in terms, you know, like, okay, so we could explore sex education as a whole topic, but one of those pieces that became very clear for you, and I think is something that we really get to explore individually, collectively, educationally, is objectification of others. And for a lot of, obviously, straight boys and men, it's of women, but even I imagine for a lot of gay men growing up, they're still pulled into that umbrella because, of course, there's all the shame around what your sexuality may be. So there's this objectification of others.
I think it's a really good thread to pull, because for me at least, and I think for others, pulling that thread might bring down the whole I'm trying to keep with my metaphor, whole tapestry, or if it was a hologram, we can just take this one little thing out and the whole thing might start to actually reform into something new.
Yeah.
So
nice. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're visual creatures. One, I actually don't want to shame the function of our bodies of looking and perceiving and recognizing beauty in the world.
Yeah.
And,
well, that's in part, that's almost what we were talking about in nature, the beauty in nature. So I love this. Yeah, please.
Yeah, and I think one of the massive positives in not having porn in my life for the last 8-9 years is being able to see and feel more beauty from things that are less common, more available, and yeah, just more simple. Otherwise, we get on this sort of freight train or conveyor belt of having to have more and more and more and more. But it is,
and again, maybe to that pleasure analogy, more and more of the very small percentage of what we've narrowed it down to, right?
Yes,
women looking a particular way, porn a particular way.
Yeah,
it's a very narrow field of what is possible for beauty.
Yes, definitely. I mean, one could think about a time before the internet.
Hopefully, just go to Instagram.
You and I can do that. That one could stare at whatever, a flower, or let's talk about in our case, certainly for me as a cisgendered male, at women. There was a time where one could look and perceive beauty only, not perceive this sex object. And I think let's make that distinction of when I say objectification, I think when you're saying it, we're trying to move away from looking at another human as a function, as an object that is going to satisfy a particular need, be it innate, but a need of mine. It's super transactional. It's not like we're going to the supermarket and going, oh yeah, I'll have one of those. Thank you very much. Because it has so little care about what's going on for the other person. And if there was more communication, if there was more dialogue and play, both those people may actually learn something. They may come to a higher experience of whatever's going on there. So,
well, it extends to that, narrowed field of what's possible in that interaction of sex, or that transaction of sex, right? I'll take from this, I'll get my end away, pleasure done, dopamine hit, on to the next, right?
Totally. So I think for me, maybe there was an initial aspect of acceptance that my human body as an animal looks at things and constantly has, is this a sexual reference? Is what I'm seeing available to procreate? That is my animal body going, right, can I make more humans with that? And that's okay. Like, that's in here and it's in here. And for me, it's down like, there. That's okay. The initial referencing of it.
Yeah.
Then for me to make a cut going, no, that particular scene, that particular person, that particular whatever is not a sexual reference in this context or at this time or at all, whatever. So I think that gate is something that I started to develop. And for me, the initial setup of that gate was, I mean, it's no way getting about it. It was 10 days of silent meditation in Vipassana, day 7, and just seeing years and years and years and years and years and years and years of how I objectified my first girlfriend, porn during the time, whatever else. And it was so shocking on my system and so debilitating and made me feel sick and just vile, actually. Some of my combined actions had so much shame involved with them that, I just went, right, no more, came back, burnt. At the time, this was back in the days of CDs and DVDs, burnt all my porn, broke all my CDs and DVDs.
But let's also get clear on the language, because burning CDs has another, another meaning. True. This is old
I didn't burn them. I cracked all the CDs, deleted all the files, just everything gone. And I think because of the power of meditation, the power of Vipassana, state I was in at the time, the shocking nature of it, whatever else, it was permanent. It just cut that particular tie. And from that day forth, no interest, no sick feeling or anything like that, just no interest. Now that may not be obviously something that everyone can achieve. So unfortunately, I think has to be a more conscious effort to understand that that humans aren't objects is a very simple way to start.
Yeah, but I love what you voiced there, right? Like, let's not shame anything. Jesus, there's so much shame around sex and everything that it involves, generally speaking. But we are animals, and so we do have an innate thing that views. But also, I think what's so important is that we don't then lean on that as an excuse for behavior. The whole idea of being aware of, like, part of our animal nature is so we can then make better choices as conscious, awake humans, right? Yeah. And I empower myself by knowing what is perhaps an animal drive in me, but I don't then lean on that, because then you're saying that you're just a basic functioning animal, and of course you're not, right? Because what that will do will just take something for its own gain, and that's the objectification, the sexual encounter that is just me getting my needs met, which even on a deeper level is often not meeting a deeper need of connection, but maybe just a physical release, right? So yeah, I think that's such a beautiful point. We are animals, but we recognize that to help us make better choices as humans.
Absolutely. And then as animals that have particular amount of energy available to them, I remember my Qigong teacher, Jared Osborne, giving me this term of psychically ejaculating. So walking around the streets, we're losing energy by, our animal is scanning and looking for something that's curvaceous and able to be bred with on a very base level. I don't walk around thinking that, but that is part of our machine, our programming is doing that. But he described as losing energy to that. You're just constantly distracted and he said psychically ejaculating on all these things. And you can imagine if you're walking down the street and you saw 20 beautiful creatures that you were more into than perhaps you needed to be, you're just losing all that energy all over the place, rather than to bring it back. And then perhaps there's a level of appreciation. Perhaps there's a level of witnessing.
Well, I think that's the invitation, isn't it?
Yeah, I
think appreciate beauty, but not objectify and kind of leak all that energy. The not the analogy, the exact picture that comes to mind when you're saying that is Wayne and Garth in Waynesville, right? Like, they're actually doing it. They're saying swing and they're moving their in the direction of, right? And great, it's funny for a laugh. It's certainly, adolescent, but also to the point, I can't be present in anything else. And you're missing out on, I think, for me, I'm just trying to go through a timeline here, is that started to happen. And then because of some of the workshops I was involved in and also running, you could then witness the beauty, not only in something that was innately attractive to you, but then like just all the humans walking down the street. Oh, I'm seeing some beauty there. I'm seeing all these things. So you can start to detach from needing this, 36, 24, 36, curvaceous, whatever is in your mind, whatever's been programmed into you as attractive. Start to unwind that a little bit and just start to broaden your feelings of beauty on that, which is, as you can just feel in my body, that just this relief. It's like, Jesus, I can let go of having to be looking out for this particular set of requirements that will satisfy me. Because I think the bitter pill to swallow is you may never get that. You may never actually achieve that particular thing that was probably just given by someone else, and isn't possibly what you want in the first place. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a beautiful invitation, is what do you actually need? What does sex and sexuality and relating with other people provide for you? What is it about? And there's so much more to that. There's an expansion, there's a depth of connection, of relating, of intimacy, and getting to know and being seen and witnessed and all these things that come with it. And potentially also this other aspect, which is, just to go very broad on it, the physical aspect of sex, and what we have narrowed down to that one piece of ejaculation a lot of the time. Yeah. I think, sex is, outside of the reproductive element of it, sex is nourishing, the playful intimacy,
simple stuff: touch, skin on skin, warmth, safety, nurturing, feelings of trust,
being held,
power, and all that sort of stuff. If you put that all in a bowl, it's very nourishing. Very nourishing.
Yeah, the nourishing bowl at the new cafe. Okay, so where I want to take us now, I'm aware of the time as well as, and I apologize for the size of the task that I'm going to set you. We can discuss it imperfectly. In your mind, what is a more effective, kind of general approach to sex education look like? And of course, that may be to, those preteens and teens, but also to perhaps a lot of the men out there who had maybe similar experiences to you and me. I grew up in a co-ed Catholic school. I also can't really remember anything significant apart from the shame and the don't do this is that might still need that. What does that look like, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent
what are we maybe missing and what can we let go of? Let's go there.
Sure. The missing question is fairly easy for me because I've spent a little bit of time working with schools and looking at the gaps in content, and it's simply the word pleasure and pleasure-based education. So the paradigm at the moment, or at least in most schools around the world, is disease, don't get pregnant, and a whole bunch of shame sprinkled over everything else.
Yeah, maybe hell, right?
Yeah,
just exactly. Throw that in the bowl.
Yeah, throw that in there for sure. And even if that isn't there, it sort of comes from a place that's where it was.
Yep. Yeah.
So completely shifting to a pleasure-based paradigm means a few things. First of all, means that you need to know what pleasure feels like in your body. And then how might I collaborate with someone else about the pleasure in their body? So I think as a paradigm, that's probably the strongest shift that sex ed is taking. Definitely there's lots of, I must admit, mainly women out there in curriculum-based areas talking about pleasure-based education. There's a few men, but that has, I think, some issues with it. But anyway, we won't go into that. So that's what's missing. And I'm sorry, your other question was?
What can we let go of? Which is kind of implied part of those in what you said there.
Well, it is, but I think the other thing is just realizing how much sexual shame is innate in our culture. And letting go of that one is a life's work, I think, because of how big it is, both individual and then the cultural baggage of shame, of sexual shame, particularly as a function.
And generations and generations.
And maybe for some of your audience, just the quick snapshot on shame is the Brené Brown version, is that shame is something, guilt is something that we did, and guilt is not a necessarily negative function of human behavior. Maybe don't do that thing again. But shame is that we are bad innately, and that's what she talks about. And then the next step of that, we are bad and you are out of the tribe. We don't want you in here. We are going to shame you so that you feel mortally wounded. I've had experiences of shame in my body where I have felt cut and instant, gut issues, reflux, all the rest of it. And you are out of the tribe. So I think those two things, pleasure-based education and noticing that shame is playing out in these young people, especially in all sorts of weird and wonderful ways, could go a long way. Because on the other side of that shame letting go is an incredible amount of permission and enjoyment. And that's also, when I say pleasure-based education, that might sound a bit wishy-washy. I think at the pinnacle of that is sex can be fun, enjoyable, creative.
And I suppose what comes with that, and amongst all of that, is arming adults and adolescents and young adults with a different paradigm, as you said, that it can be fun and pleasurable. One, we've just kind of labeled that this little piece over here, basically like quick sex and ejaculation and kudos and respect, and that person wants me validation. But expanding the idea of what it can be in terms of fun and pleasure, removing all the negative shame-based shit around it, and therefore kind of like arming and empowering us with a different way to approach it. Like that feels like a different ground from which to kind of step and navigate.
Absolutely. If that's your flag, I'm just thinking here off the cuff, but if that's your flag that sex is fun, it means that when it isn't, something needs to be investigated. So then you can start to go down the consent rabbit hole, rather than what's happening in Australia is, at least, it's all about consent. And it is about consent and boundaries. But if you're waving this pleasure and intimacy can be fun flag, at least that keeps it there from a positive reward point of view, from a human nature point of view. And then what can we do to make this more fun, more creative, more pleasant?
Yeah, because that's not negating the need for responsibility and boundaries. But yeah, when the only flag is consent, there's a lot of fear attached to that.
Instantly. It's pretty much the same as talking about disease-based sex education. Consent-based it's great. It's something I've drilled into my kid in terms of body safety, autonomy. This is my body. Who touches it is completely up to me. All incredibly important, and negates a whole bunch of shit that could go wrong in her life. And as soon as she's old enough, I want her to understand that this particular behavior that humans do and animals do is because it's fun. Primarily, that's why everyone's having sex. It's not to make babies, otherwise we'd all have like 10,000 kids. It's because sex is fun.
Beautiful. I love that. I just think simple line. It sums it up. But again, hopefully what it does is also invites, nuance, right? Like I got that when I was 16, right? But actually it was connected to a whole bunch of other baggage and shit that wasn't mine, right? And so there's that nuance to explore in there. Alex, thank you for that. A big topic. Well done. You nailed it. Okay, so now, Alex,
just before we move on for a second, Mike, sorry, I just don't want to negate. Just had some emotion come up there in terms of, and it's not always fun. Like I'm sort of pointing and flying that flag.
Yeah, and you did say, and I'll reflect the words, can be, right? And I think they are important, right?
And also be incredibly.
That can be a lot of pressure. It is. It has to be. Like it's different. Yeah.
Yeah. It can be all sorts of things. I think one thing that it'd be nice if it was more often than not, is fun, and also emotional releasing and allowing all sorts of support and nourishment and all the rest of it. But I just didn't want to forget that. Yeah.
But to reiterate the other point that you shared earlier, which is, and if it isn't, maybe there's room for exploration and investigation there.
Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. Okay, Alex, for you, what's going on now? If people wanted to explore a little bit of Alex White and what's going on in the world, what have you got for us?
Look, I think to join all this back together and mention that, I used to run workshops, and the touch forest was a pretty big thing in my life for a while, and that explored intimacy between random strangers. And it was a fantastic evening with lots of safety and consent and fun. However, because of COVID and just where my life was going, I'm no longer running those. To find me, my domain is alexwhite.com.au. And I think to join these things together is that I think one pinnacle experience, and apparently my mum mentioned to me not that long ago that I was created outside in the sun, apparently at Hanging Rock. I think a pinnacle experience is to be with another, or perhaps with yourself if that's not available, and in a pleasure state outside in nature. And that can generally only happen on private property or maybe a national park or whatever. But I really do encourage people to get outside and enjoy each other, whether it's actual intercourse or sex, or simply just enjoying a level of intimacy outside, because again, nature holds all of this energy for you and supports a lot of things happening, gives you a lot of creativity and lots of other input into that. A lot of the retreats that I both support in terms of bringing facilitators onto my land and run around that sort of topic. Not so much the being intimate in nature with another person. That's up to people in their private time. Certainly feeling creative, feeling sensuous, feeling in general, feeling in nature, outside, with the elements is mainly what I'm focusing on these days, and supporting other facilitators to run their types of workshops, whether that be vision questing, intimacy and polarity with my main teacher, Michaela Boehm and Steve James, or other various wonderful things that are happening down there. That's my bag lately, and I really enjoy supporting people to do that work on an amazing piece of land, and enjoy. I've got a small men's group that I run down there privately, which has been amazing support for myself, but also for those men. And that's kind of me at the moment. I encourage people to seek clarity either from yourself after listening to this podcast, and I'm happy to, through you, perhaps give a few more references and links if they're appropriate. But yeah, that's me at the moment.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, and there's been some people and some things that you have mentioned, so we'll go back through and drop some of those in if people want to explore them more. And at very least, we'll make sure that you can reach out to Alex for perhaps some more specific, things that he's suggested in terms of people and resources and stuff like that. Alex, it's been a pleasure catching up, but chatting about some of the stuff and also, actually diving into what you're doing out there in nature. I love it. And I really appreciate the conversation around sex and, choosing to empower ourselves with a different view and look and, I suppose, world of possibilities in that area that can hold so much power over us. From our past experiences and culture and all that stuff. So thank you for coming on the show, Alex, you bloody legend.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Mike. And just a note to the people listening, that may have brought up quite a lot for them. We covered a lot of ground there. I was certainly feeling a few emotions as going through that. So just encourage people listening to sit with that, and to perhaps, if they want to investigate anything further, to look at those initial imprints, those initial ways that they came about their understanding of sex, and start untangling it from there. It's a hell of a journey.
Most definitely. Yeah. And of course, if you don't feel like you have the tools, then there are people, so at the very least, you're listening to me, feel free to reach out and potentially point you in a direction of those who can. Absolutely. Good luck to those brave enough to do that. Most definitely. Alex, thank you very much. Thank you. Cheers, mate. You've been listening to the Everyday Legends podcast, the show that is dedicated to championing everyday men and supporting you in getting more from life, love, and the everyday. If this podcast has benefited you, if you enjoyed this, then my invitation is to share this with a man that you think will also benefit from this and enjoy this. Remember, please, wherever you find your podcast, to like us, subscribe to us, click download first, leave us a review. All those things both make sure you get all the updates when they come in, and it supports us in getting this podcast in front of more everyday men that could use it. Until next time, I've been Mike Campbell. Remember to build that legendary integrity, and remember, everyday men, we thrive when we are championed, when we are supported, when we are appreciated and recognized for who we choose to be in the world. Here is my invitation to both show up and be that everyday legend, and to continue to champion the everyday men in your life.